just streaming. I'll let you know when it's done.
Okay. Well, while Mr. Wood, Mr. Wood, we can't hear you, but if you can sort your internet connection out, when you come to speak, we'll be able to hear you. Right. So I'm going to open the meeting of the Housing and Communities Committee. I shall go to item 1. Apologies for absence. Sarah, I understand we've got Councillor Rimmer, substitute for Councillor Turner. Right, so that's fine. Now I should do the introductory remarks for the remote meeting. This is a meeting of the council. This is a meeting of the council which is being held remotely. The meeting is being recorded and streamed via YouTube, where members of the public are able to watch the meeting. Please note that any comments posted on the chat page of the council's YouTube page during a recording of the meeting will not be monitored by the council. The recording will be available on the council's website following the meeting. All members have been provided with the remote committee guidance note prior to the meeting. Please can these be adhered to? What's that? Please can these be adhered to during this remote meeting? Points include switching off mobile phones.
Nikki gives her apologies for this evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. If I could just finish the introduction. Mr. Wood. Please switch your profile to mute unless you are speaking. If you wish to speak, please raise your... Sorry, can everyone mute themselves, please? Right, let's just get a bit of feedback. Please switch your profile to mute unless you are speaking. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand so that I can see that, and then I'll invite you to speak. For each item, yeah, we know the last bit, but each item, group leaders and committee will discuss that. That's fine. So, item 2, declarations of interest. Sarah?
Sorry, did you want to do apologies for absence first?
Oh, I've done it the wrong way round. Okay,
sorry. So you've got that we've got Councillor Rimmer is substituted for Councillor Turner, and apologies from Mrs. Forder.
That's right. Thank you, sir. I have a declaration of interest from Councillor McGovern, who I have invited as a ward councillor for Vange.
As I'm not a member of the committee and have no voting rights, I probably don't have to declare an interest, do I? I mean, I'm happy to, but I just realised I'm not actually.
It's for noting, Councillor McGovern. You've put your hand up to say
I've been lobbied by several residents around this issue.
Okay, Councillor Schrader, you indicated to speak, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I declare a non-pecuniary interest in item 4 in that my partner is employed by Swan Housing Association.
Thank you, Councillor Schrader. Are there any other declarations of interest? I don't see any more, so I'm going to proceed to item 3, the exclusion of public and press. But before I raise that, let 1 second. Yes, Councillor McGovern.
If you want to go first, that's fine with me.
No, you go first.
Well, I think that in this particular instance, I'm struggling to see why we should exclude the press and the public. I don't, having looked through the agenda item, I don't really see any sort of financial, anything that really we would not want them to be aware of. And obviously also a piece appeared, I don't know if everyone's aware, a piece appeared in today's Echo about what's potentially happening with High Barretts. Now, I've no idea where the information came from, but they seem to be relatively well briefed, albeit a little mistaken on a few items. And now, normally, if it was an item that potentially was going to exclude the press and public, I wouldn't be quoted on that. But in this instance, I felt they clearly had the story, they were going to run the story, and it just made sense to factually put them right on a few things. I have to say, unfortunately, there was a number of factual errors in the article anyway, but that's not my fault, Gov, honest. So, not wanting to be facetious, but I'm not really seeing why this needs to be in private.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor McGovern. That was the question I was going to ask Leslie. I mean, if members play it sensible about money and contracts, which, as Councillor McGovern said, is not in this document, if we use our common sense, we don't need to go to part 2 unless a particular member wishes to raise an item that is part 2. 1 second, Councillor McGowan. Sorry, Councillor Rimmer wanted to follow on with a point, so you can think of an answer to my question. Councillor Rimmer, do you want to add on
yes.
to the point?
No, I did have some questions about some of the granular budgetary matters that were raised in the report, and maybe the answers would be in part 2, I don't know. But I am quite keen to ask those questions. My concern I'd like to raise, though, and apologies to my fellow member, Councillor McGowan, is just that if something is labelled as part 2, should we really be discussing it with the press at all, even if it is to correct factual inaccuracy?
Can I come back on that, Mr. Chair?
I will do in a second. I've got a question from Leslie, but I still think what we can talk about as part 2 is part 2. Now, if Councillor Rimmer feels there's a financial point that we'll have to skip to part 2, I'm quite happy to do, and then we go back to regular meeting. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did seek advice from the monitoring office, and due to the sensitivity, obviously we have been monitoring the block and residents are aware that there's a meeting tonight, but to hear it debated and to hear that decision without any support being available that your property is to be demolished, and particularly for those, well, not just, you know, for all of the residents, but we have leaseholders in there as well. You know, we haven't told them that this is definitely going to be the decision. I've got, as part of my presentation tonight, is talking about how we're going to support residents post-decision. With some people will be very upset by this, and to hear it on a live stream like this is not the way that I would want to hear that my property was going to be demolished. So that was the discussion really that I had with Paul. It was really around the fact the decision is yet to be made. And Paul, you know, gave me the advice that it should be part 2. I don't know if Sarah's got anything to add to that, but I did seek that advice.
No, I've got nothing further to add from that. You had the advice from Paul.
I've got 2 members wishing to speak. Councillor McGowan wishes to come back, and Councillor Henry.
Thank you. First off, Leslie, I don't think anyone has said a decision's been taken. It clearly hasn't. That's what you guys are here to do tonight. But I do think there is a general habit in local government, and obviously given my professional background, I would say this, but I think it's also true, to exclude the press and the public when it isn't always necessary. Clearly the residents have been spoken to quite properly, so they know a decision's been being made tonight. So I don't understand the logic of saying, yes, a decision will be being made tonight, but you can't view it. This is the futures we're talking about, and most of them, if the decision goes the way I hope it to, will be mightily relieved about that. So I'm not sure why we're going into part. Like I say, if at some point it is necessary to go in part 2, as long as members are careful and responsible, I don't see why the whole thing needs to be in part 2.
Thank you, Councillor McGowan. Councillor Henry.
I just wanted to ask, beyond obviously having one of the sitting councillors for the ward here in the room, what representation has been taken from the families of these affected blocks to address Leslie's concerns about, obviously, for some of them, this may not be good news tonight. What sort of representation have we taken from those residents?
Leslie?
No, we haven't, because the decision, obviously, this has been fairly swift in terms of needing to get a committee decision. And part of bringing it tonight is not because the block is unsafe at this moment of time and needs to be demolished. It's so that we've got the decision so that we can work with the existing residents, of which there's only 6 now in that block, to facilitate a move into alternative accommodation. So we've got a couple of leaseholders in there and 4 secure tenants, but unless we have that decision to demolish, we don't have a footing on which to just move them out of that block at the moment.
Councillor Schrader.
Thank you, Chairman. For what it's worth, I tend to agree with Councillor McGowan. I think we do tend to do things behind closed doors too often. And I think certainly I can think of occasions in the past where we've had to do things in part 2, and it would have made our lives infinitely more easy if we had not done so. However, I think that is something we need to look at. Maybe we need to look at the protocol around that. And you'll recall we discussed that at the, I forget the name of the subcommittee or working group that we were on together that looked at that, but maybe we need to revisit it. But I think ultimately we have to be guided by our professional officers. And I think this has been printed on the green. The recommendation from the professional officers is that it should be in part 2. So I'll be voting for the exclusion of the press and public. But in principle, I tend to agree with Councillor McGurran. And I think this is something we do need to look at. But I think on this occasion, we are where we are and we need to follow the professional advice. That's my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schrader. I just want to wrap up on that point before I go to the vote. Is there any other members seeking to come in? My view is that the stuff that needs to be spoken about part 2, we can skip to part 2 and deal with that during part 2. Sorry, Mr. Wood. Mr. Wood?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Obviously, myself and Elsie are 10 representatives, and we are members of the public. Surely, if this was a really important part 2, we would not have been sent these papers in the first place. So, for us to be excluded, I see as a pointless exercise.
I appreciate your comment, Mr. Wood, but you're a member of the committee as a tenant leaseholder without voting rights. But thank you for raising that. So, as I was saying, there's no other one wishing to comment before I carry on. So, how I'm going to vote is not to take this to part 2 unless we need to go part 2. So, I think if the officers don't mind giving a general presentation, and then if we need to skip to part 2, we skip to part 2. Right, so I shall put the question of going to part 2 to the vote. Do you have that, Sarah, for me? Sarah?
Yeah, it's there on the agenda. So do you want me to read out? So are you going to vote
Yes,
on?
please.
So you're asking members to vote on that the public and press be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following items on the grounds that it is likely that if members of the public and press were present during the item, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined by paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, and the public interest in maintaining this exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. It's actually, correction, it's actually paragraph 6 of part 1, not 3.
Thank you, Sarah. Perfectly read. Right, so those in favour, and I shall read up the members. Councillor Golden.
I'm not in favour of moving into part 2.
Sorry, was that a vote against? Councillor Golden? Against. Councillor Henry?
I feel I have to support officers' guidance on this, and if that guidance is wrong, then that should have been cleared up before we came to this room.
So your vote is going to
vote to go to part 2.
Councillor Schrader?
I vote in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Rimmer?
In favour.
Sorry, you cut out.
In favour.
Thank you. Councillor Yacoub?
Against.
And I shall be voting against. So we will start the presentation, and when we need to go into part 2, we will ask the question again. So can it be Jeffrey Driscoll? Is he here?
No, it's me, Councillor Smith. Jeff's having trouble accessing, but I'm going to present the report anyway. So
What we'll do, Leslie, do what you can in part 1, regular council setting. And if there's anything needs to be noted in part 2 for members' questions, then we will take the vote again to go to part 2. Thank you, Leslie.
okay, thank you. So the report this evening considers a number of options for the block 20 to 36 High Barretts, which is situated in the Vange ward. Members will see from the report that the block suffered significant structural movement, and the quality of life of residents in some cases has been severely impacted. It had been hoped that works including partial demolition could prevent the necessity of demolishing the entire block, but for a number of reasons included in the report, this is no longer a viable option. The block sits alongside another similar block which does not have the same structural issues at the present time. Further work is required to understand the redevelopment potential of the site, and the decision tonight is not for this evening. We'll bring that to a future committee for consideration. The main reason for bringing the report this evening is to get approval to demolish the block 20 to 36 High Barretts. This will then allow officers to facilitate the decanting of the remaining 6 residents to suitable alternative accommodation. These residents have been living in very difficult circumstances for quite a long period, and this is clearly having a detrimental effect on their well-being. Within the block, we have 4 secure tenants who the council will have responsibility for rehousing within our stock. And we also have 3 leaseholders, including 1 Swan property. The Swan property is actually empty, so there's 3 voids in the block. One of those is the Swan property. And we'll commence negotiations to buy back those properties if the decision is approved. So essentially it's 6 residents that we're talking about this evening in total. We have already prepared a communication plan in anticipation of tonight's decision, and if members are minded to approve option 3, then I have officers ready in place to make phone calls to those affected tomorrow, and that'll be followed up with a letter. And the reason for that is to make sure that we have a one-to-one conversation with each of those residents to make sure that they are fully supported and understand the decision. We also intend to contact those residents in the adjoining block to ensure that they're informed of this decision tonight, because obviously it will cast some uncertainty potentially over their future until the decision is made at a future committee on what we intend to do with that particular site. The only thing I suppose to add that's not already in the report that I haven't covered is that the figures quoted in the report are estimates at this time. And we don't want to start work on actually demolishing the site. So there's a decision asked for to demolish, but we're not physically going to go in and demolish that block immediately. It's not dangerous. It's not going to fall down, you know, immediately. So with the exception of securing and making safe that block, we will not be doing anything ahead of a further report to this committee. And as I say, we won't be physically demolishing the building, and there's no danger of collapse. So I think probably that covers, you know, without going into the detail of the report that you already have, that covers the reasons for the report this evening and the decision that we are seeking, which is really all about the well-being of those residents and to enable us to deal with that situation in the immediacy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's okay, Leslie. Before we open the floor, in case we have to flick to part 2, would you mind reading out the 3 recommendations so the public watching can see the 3 recommendations listed on, yes, Councillor McGowan, on page 4, and then I will open the floor to members and tenants and leaseholder reps.
Certainly. Okay, so recommendation 1 is that the committee approve the decision to demolish block of flats 20 to 36 High Barretts to allow officers to decant existing residents pending the outcome of a feasibility and viability study. Recommendation 2, that authority is delegated to the Assistant Director of Communities in conjunction with the Solicitor to the Council to negotiate the purchase of 2 leasehold properties, the flat owned by Swan and the rehousing of the remaining council tenants into alternative accommodation in accordance with the approved allocation scheme. And finally, recommendation 3, that feasibility and viability studies be undertaken and options for the reprovision of social housing units on the site be reported to a future committee of housing and communities.
Thank you for that, Leslie. Councillor McGowan, you have the floor first.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I would like to thank the officers for the work they've carried out on this. As we know, this is not exactly a new situation. Residents have been living in this situation for quite some time now, and I'm very grateful for the work that's been carried out. What I would say is I am supporting option 3.
Sorry, Councillor McGowan, can I stop you there? I don't know who you are. Is it Galaxy Tab A? You're not muted, and I can hear a dog barking.
Yeah, sorry, it's my dog.
Everyone mute? Oh, sorry, Aidan. Apologies. Sorry for that, Councillor McGarren.
Apologies about that. I obviously don't have the best trained dog in the world, as you can witness. Yeah, I will be supporting option 3, and I would urge, well, I won't be because I don't have a vote, but I will be urging the rest of the committee to support option 3. The reason being, well, I think, you know, it's outlined in the report, so I don't need to go on at any great length about it. But I think the uncertainty that residents have been living with for the last couple of years, which is highlighted in the report, is a major factor. You know, people are living in conditions that are not acceptable, in my view. And whilst it's not ideal to have to decant, as the term is, I think in this particular situation, it's the only option we've got. And I think the residents understand that and accept that. And what I would say is, and again, the report reflects this, and I'm grateful, is that communication is vital. Obviously, it will be a difficult process in some respects. It's not going to happen overnight. We understand that because, you know, much as we'd like to have suitable accommodation to house people immediately, that isn't always the case. So we need to work with the residents to understand their needs and to meet them as quickly as we can and as appropriately as we can. In terms of the other block, the lower numbers block, what I would urge the council to do, council officers to do, and I'm sure they will, is to move as quickly as possible to get to a resolution with that as well, because we've had the uncertainty with the 20 to 36 block. What we don't want is to have a longer period of uncertainty with the 2 to 18 block than is necessary. And I understand more work needs to be done, but I'm sure I can rely on the council staff to proceed as quickly as possible with that. And I would just finally like to say, despite the fact that I oppose the expulsion of the press and public, that was in no way a criticism of council officers. Had we had more time, I would have raised it in advance. So it's not a criticism. Sometimes these things are delicate calls, they're marginal, and I think this was a case in point. So I would just like to say that my key concern is that the residents are involved every step of the way and we get the best possible resolution for all of them. And I'm sure that the council officers are 100% onto that already.
Thanks for that, Councillor McGarren. Leslie O'Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've got Trevor on the call at the moment from our development investment team, and he's very aware of the urgency around this, and we will do our absolute utmost to bring a report to a future committee as soon as possible. As soon as we've got all the information for members to make a meaningful decision, we will be back before you. So, and you've got our absolute assurances that the residents are our #1 priority in making sure we take care of those in the immediate.
Yes, and just a reminder to everybody, councillors and tenant leaseholder reps, if you want to talk about anything that is part 2, let me know and we will talk about that when we have to go to part 2. Councillor, you have the floor, please.
Yes, certainly. I was aware of that. I'm going to frame my remarks in that respect. So I'm going to just say that these are my part 1 remarks, and then I'll have some part 2 questions, which I will wait until other councillors have had their turn to speak on. So my remark is really that I think the officers have done a good job on this. They've been very patient. It's clearly they were looking at options which were going to bring the best resolution first back in 2017. And now they've seen that those are not feasible and they've got to move in a different way. I can see no reason not to go with the recommendation of this report and to just demolish this block and rebuild, and in the meantime look at the feasibility of and the structural analysis of the upper block as well. I will leave it there because I do have some part 2 questions, but I just thought I should show my support for that recommendation whilst we're in part 1.
Thanks for that, Councillor Rimmer. Now, before I go to 10 leaseholder reps, is there any comments from the elected members? No. Sorry, Councillor Henry, you have the floor.
I have the floor, but haven't got the thumbs to find the mute button. I don't have a problem with recommendation 3 at all. Option 3 seems the most sensible plot. The one thing I would ask is, what sort of a time frame are we looking at here in terms of possible decanting? What sort of assistance can the tenants and leaseholders of these properties expect from us? And you know, what sort of an area are they likely to be decanted to? Because obviously there'll be doctors' surgeries, there'll be schools, potentially, a variety of other things. And what can we do about that? Thank you.
I'll call your eye, Councillor Schrader. Leslie O'Shea.
Thank you. Councillor Henry, that will be, we've already got officers lined up to make contact with those individuals. In fact, one of them we've already started to have those conversations. So we, as far as we possibly can, we will meet their needs. So it's on a like-for-like basis, but we will take all those things into consideration. Of course we will, when we're moving them. And the same with the leaseholders. And I think a bit around, as we start to move tenants and leaseholders out of that block, we're very mindful of the timing on that and wouldn't want to leave people behind on their own. So officers are very alive to that fact and will work together to make sure that we keep people safe, and as far as possible we get them you know, a property that they are happy with. So
you're happy with that answer, Councillor Henry?
Yeah, sorry, couldn't find the button again. Yes, thank you.
Councillor Schrader.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to quickly follow up on option 4. I mean, I'm in favour of option 3, but it does say under option 4 this isn't recommended because obviously it hasn't been fully appraised at the present time, and it gives an undertaking that this work will be done and we'll have a fully costed option brought to a future committee for decision. I just wondered if the officers were able to give us an indicative timescale on when that item will be able to be brought forward, because I tend to agree with Councillor McGurran that ideally we want to resolve that as soon as possible as well. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Schrader. You say recommendation 4. I'm on page 4 now of the agenda.
Sorry, option 4, which is about the option to demolish the entire block 2 to 36.
Oh, you mean under background?
Page 6.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, it's really faded. Yes, page 6, that's what I meant. It talks about that work being undertaken and a fully costed option being brought forward at a future committee. I just wondered if we had an idea how long that was going to take. Thank you.
Oh, sorry about that, Councillor Schrader. When you said recommendations, I was looking at the recommendations we've got to vote on, not the options. Sorry, thanks for clearing up. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask Trevor. My view is that we would want to bring something back this side of Christmas. So I'm thinking perhaps November, December time, but I'm just going to check with Trevor because it's Trevor and his team that will be actually pulling those appraisals together. So Trevor, could I just ask you to respond to that, please?
Yes, certainly. I believe we would have the necessary information available for the next committee meeting, which I think is on November the 24th. I think we should be able to have the information ready for that meeting.
Okay. Right. Members have all got their answers to their questions, the part 1 stuff. Tenants and leaseholder reps, is there any sort of non-part 2 questions you have or comments? Is that you, Mr. Wood, raising your hand, please?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just as long as you know, we've been given assurances today that the thought of the residents is at the heart of everything that's being done, and as long as that's assured, then I'm comfortable with it.
Right.
Hello?
Leslie, do you want to answer Mr. Wood's point? Leslie? Leslie?
Yes, I mean,
Leslie?
am I muted?
I think you already have, Leslie, but go on.
Yeah, you've got my absolute assurance that the residents are absolutely at the heart of this. And we've already, you know, done the work in the background to make sure that tomorrow we can get to work on this.
Okay, Mr. Wood.
Okay.
Mrs. French, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you, by the way. Thank you.
That's okay. Mrs. French, we can't hear.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Oh, that's good. No, I didn't have nothing to say. It was just about things going up and down, making its own mind up what it was doing.
Right. Before we skip to part two to answer some of Councillor Rimmer's questions, Councillor McGowan, the member for Vangewold, raised his hand.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Very briefly, I don't doubt for a second that Leslie and her team will do everything they can to make sure that what is, you know, a difficult transition will be made as easy as possible and as successful as possible. But in terms of local residents, as the ward councillor, if they have any concerns at any time, please contact me. I will do what I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGowan. Right, I'm happy now. I think we've dealt with all the non-part two stuff. So Sarah's going to read out the wording for part two, and we're going to vote on that so we can answer Councillor Rimmer's questions.
Right. Just so members are aware, if we go into part two, I've got to stop the YouTube live recording and I won't be able to turn it on again. So obviously if members of the public are watching it, they won't see your resolutions. But I will continue, I will pause it and record it on the recording that goes on the website. So it will be on there tomorrow. But with the YouTube recording, once we've stopped it, we can't start it again, just so you're aware.
Okay. Read the incarnation out to go take us to part two.
Right, so you're voting on that the public and press be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following items on the grounds that it is likely that if members of the public and press were present during the item, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined by paragraph 6 of part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, and the public interest in maintaining this exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information.
Thank you. Councillor Golden, how will you be voting?
Favour.
In favour, was that? Councillor Henry?
In favour.
Councillor Schrader?
In favour.
Councillor Rimmer?
In favour.
Councillor Yacoub?
In favour.
And I shall be in favour. So if you can stop the recording and take us to part two, please, Sarah.
I'll tell you when we've sorted.